last week class, I have actually touched a bit about this static test, and then our following chapters will be for dynamic tests. So, what is static test? How you can compare this static test and dynamic test? Still remember what was this? When we conduct this static test?
Before system come up.
Yes. So it means we have the development of the system in the between, right? So the test which we conduct before the development of the system development, it means we did not have the functioning system yet. We still need to do testing, okay, but we don't have the source code, we don't have the complete functional system, so we are going to do the testing on other different artifacts, for example the documentation, the design, the requirement, and so on. So the chapter 4 later we will be discussing chapter 4, chapter 5 we will be discussing on the dynamic, which will be the test we conduct after the development of the system, where we can see the dynamically how the system behave. Okay, so this chapter it's more to the first level of the testing, which is more onto the documentation, more onto maybe we prepare a line of code without executing anything. Okay, so we will be discussing the concept of static tests and also various types of static tests. So static test, it means we conduct the test of the system or any test object without running or executing the code. So it means we don't have any code, we don't have any program, any module, any functionality, any system which actually to be running, to be executing yet. So the first keyword here, static test, means without executing the code. Even though if we have written the source code, we are actually checking the source code by analyzing, but not by executing. But the reason why we test the system or test object, it means the documentation, it still belong to the system. So it means we are testing the systems by reviewing or by checking the requirement, by checking the design, and so on. Okay, but the important keyword is without running or without executing the source code. That is the important keyword. Okay, so as what I've mentioned, we check on the artifacts for defect. So it means is our SRS, is our proposal, is our SDD is actually having any defect, having any fault inside. Okay, so we will check the test object against the test document to find if there is any human error inside or if there is any fault. Okay, so for example, like any incomplete of requirement, any maybe conflict of the requirement, or did not meet any standards which is required by the static. Okay, so why static test is needed? I'm going to develop the system. Why don't I straightly check the system? I test this system. Why I need to check all this documentation and waste my time? Why static test is needed? Can I skip static test? Let's assume we are not using any methodology, like for example agile. Of course, agile means you can say that means we don't have time, we have only 2 weeks and we only work like sprint by sprint, very little pieces of the system. Yes, but let's assume we are working on a very traditional methodology, not waterfall model, of course, where we have produced a proper documentation. We have documentation. So, in that case, why? I need this static test. Can I just skip? Can I just straightly test what I'm developing? Can I just pass everything to the tester? Why static test is needed? No idea. Okay, no worries. Later we will see the advantages of the static test. Huh? Okay, so under the static test, we are going to check on the review. Good, to be frank. Okay, okay, so we will be discussing about the review, about the static analysis, control flow analysis, and also data flow analysis. Okay, so when we say static test, okay, any type of static test, the most common term we will use is review, because we don't have a source code. We cannot say any specific type of testing name here. So doesn't matter either we are doing any inspection, we are doing any checking, any go through things, all these which fall under the static test, the most common term we will use is review. So it means we want to review the SRS, we want to review the proposal, we want to review the design document. So it means the common word which is presenting all these different type or different techniques of static test is actually we call review. But of course, there is individual naming based on what we will be doing. Okay, but as a overall, when we say static test, the first thing come to mind is review, because I want to review the document. But different type of documentation or different types of artifacts, we will use different naming of this review technique. Okay, so we will discuss about that. And this review also, it's kind of similar like inspection. It means I want to check if this document is correctly done according to what the client said, according to the what the standard say. So it means we want to inspect those documents. Okay, but since we have different level of review technique, or we have different level of static test, which is formal, which is semi-formal, and also which is not formal. So we actually have different naming which we can see. Okay, we will see what are the naming later. Okay, so when we say review, it means we want to review or we want to inspect all this document. Okay, so the more longer time we have, so let's assume we use a traditional methodology. So it means we have more longer time where we need to prepare each of this documentation accordingly. So for example, like your final project, okay, you are producing your proposal, you are producing your chapter by chapter. So it means we are actually doing the inspection or reviewing of each of this chapter to make sure that the continuous chapter is actually not carrying any misunderstanding or any defects which you have done in the previous chapter. So the same thing goes here. When we said we want to review the contract, the requirement, the design, the test plan, or even the test case, and also the pseudocode or anything related to the coding, so that the defect which is inside the documentation can be identified earlier, and it will not be carried forward inside the code, and it will not be carried forward to our final developed software. Okay, so reviews, they actually efficient compare, actually this test is actually much more efficient compared to the dynamic testing, because we can actually identify the defect earlier. We can actually improve the quality of this document in a very early stage, because the more high quality is your documentation, the understanding on the requirement, on the design will be much more higher. So when we have a proper understanding on this requirement, on this design, automatically our end product later will be in a good quality. Okay, so as usual, we will always start our test as early as possible. So the same thing, once we have done with the documentation, we can go to, we can review the documentation to find the mistakes, to find any conflicts or any inconsistency in the documentation in an early stage. Okay, so this will be the positive effects or maybe the advantages of this static test or this review. Any type of techniques which we are using, it means the positive part of it. So the first one is cheaper. Why it is much more cheaper to do the defect elimination in static test? Why it is more cheaper? Why it is cheaper to do, sorry, defect elimination in static test? So it means when we review, right? When we review a mistake in a documentation, why it is cheaper for the defect elimination in static test, of course, compared to dynamic test. Because we discover the defect in early stage. Okay, so how it will make it cheaper? Why it is cheaper? When we defect this, when we identify the defect in documentation, automatically it's early stage. Okay, and what type of defect actually we identify in documentation? Is it involve coding? Is it involve programming? Is it involve tools for us to compile, for us to fix anything? Or it's just in a documentation, we just correct them in the documentation and we are done? So why it is actually cheaper in the static test? Is our documentation much more complex than the working system? You are producing documentation now, right? So later, after your project one submitted, you will start to do the development of your proposed system, proposed application. So compared to what you are trying to fix on that code when you are doing the development or after you have completed the development, is it fixing something in your documentation much more complex, much more complicated? Do you understand my question, what I'm saying? To identify defect in the documentation and to do the fixing, it's always much more cheaper because it is much more easier thing to fix. I just need to change the statement of my requirement. I just need to change the design. I just maybe wrongly put something in the objective part. So I just change it. Compared to what you have developed, what is using a certain programming language, a certain editor, you don't know where is the mistake. Now you need to compile it, you need to analyze the source code, then you need to fix it, which is actually using more resources, more time, and more human power. So that's why to do the defect elimination in static test is much more cheaper. Got it? So once we identify defects in the earlier stages before the development will be start, automatically we can skip all the issues which might have to face during the development time. because of confusion in the requirement is not clear, why we are using this term again and again, but it is actually referring to different two peoples, those kind of thing can be fixed early. So when we fix that early, automatically our development time will be much more understandable to be done. So when the development time having less issue, it can automatically shorten the development time. So when we shorten the development time, maybe we can complete our project within the timeline without any issue, or even much more earlier before the timeline. So that can be another positive effect. So the third one is the cost reduction. Okay, so this is actually the budget part. So compared to do debugging in completed software, okay, doing changes or doing review or doing fixing at the defect we identify in documentation is always less cost, because we don't need any special tool to do that. We don't need any specialization to do that. So it will be always a cost reduction if we do that in the static test. And the fourth effect will be reduce failure rate. So if I can reduce uh, all the issues we identify in a documentation, our development stage will be less issue. And once our development less issue, automatically it can reduce the failure rate, because we able to understand how the system suppose should work, what we exactly need to do, what exactly the client said, what is the expectation of the client, because we have reviewed the requirement, we know exactly what the client said. So all this actually reduce the failure rate of the final system later. So this will be the positive effects or the advantages of the static test. Doesn't matter what type or what technique of static test we are conducting, or review or inspection, whatever we are conducting, this will be the positive effect to do that. Okay, clear? Can understand now my previous question, why static test is important, why it is good not to skip them and just depend on the dynamic test. Because whatever you said as a positive effect here, automatically it will turn as a negative impact or negative effect during the dynamic if we don't do the review or we don't do the static test. Okay, got question? Sorry, what is it? Someone got question? Are you guys making fun? Okay, so let's see the process here. Okay, so this review process is actually like as a overall. Okay, when we said review, so it can be doing different type of inspection, different types of go through of the code, walk through of the code. So it can be different type technique. But as a general, this can be 6 different review process. It means a step-by-step process what normally we can do during the static test. So it always start with the planning. Okay, so followed by the kickoff, followed by the individual preparation, and then review meeting, rework, and follow up. So this is like a standard of a process, okay, for a review process. So let's assume if our review process, whatever review or whatever technique we want to do is a less formal one, then it might be different a bit in the process. If it's a very formal technique, then it will be a bit different. So it's actually something flexible based on the level or the type of documentation or when we are doing the technique. So it can be formal, it can be less formal, or it can be very formal one. Okay, so normally when we say formal, okay, formal technique, it means there will be a group of people involved, not one person work. It will be a group of people, and it will be having formal meetings. So when we said formal meetings, it means there will be a formal minutes will be taken, formal report will be taken, and a formal follow up of the work will be happening. So this is formal one. Okay, when we said less formal or semi-formal, it means maybe we have one round of meeting, and we have maybe a very less formal reporting, or maybe just to check on something. So it means something less formal. And when we say the technique is only involve you one person, you do a documentation, you do the coding, can you check yourself? So it means I don't need to make it a formal. Just because I want to check my own code, I don't need to call for a meeting, I don't need to do a reporting, I don't need to have people to do follow up. So it means I do the work, maybe me myself alone, or maybe with the two people. So when we say something like that, then it will be totally no formal. So when we want to do this review, right, then we need to know where are we. Are we actually at the not formal stage at all, or are we at the semi, we want to do the semi formal, or we want to make it very very formal one. So we need to know. Okay, because some documentation or some requirements, some design, maybe we don't need to make it very formal yet, or maybe after a few version, then we need to bring all these people, so we need to make it formal. So it's depend. Okay, but when we said this process, this is actually a general process, and it can be flexibly changed based on what type of review it will be. Is it a formal one, is it a semi formal one, or is it a not formal at all? Okay, so let's go through one by one this process. We need to remember this this six process. This correct flow is very very important. So it will start with the planning, then turn to the kick-off, and then individual preparation, review meeting, rework, and follow up. Okay, so let's see the first one, planning. So as usual, whatever we want to do, we need to start with the planning. So in the planning process, what we do is we need to decide which document we want to review now, we want to check now. Okay, maybe at this stage we are actually working on a requirement on a SRS. Okay, which version of this SRS now? So we need to decide which document in the software development process we want to review. Then also which review technique is suitable one for us to use. Okay, either are we doing the quality checking, so are we using the inspection here to check on the standards, or are we just doing a normal review? So we need to know which technique, and according to the document, according to the technique, we need to form a review meeting. Okay, so there is few members who will be required when we said we need to form a review team. Okay, so later I will discuss one by one who are the roles which will be involved in the review. Okay, so this is the first process, planning process. So we need to check which document, we need to check which review technique we want to use, and according to that we will form the review team. Okay, then we move to the second process, which is the kick-off or the overview. Okay, so here what will happen is the necessary information about the review will be shared out to all the review team members. Okay, so it means there is a role involved here, which is the secretary. Am I spelling it correctly? Sorry, my keypad is having problem with some of it. Secretary. Okay. Okay. So there is one role here, the first role here, who is the secretary. So this secretary will be sharing all the information about the meeting, about the document which we want to review to the team members. Okay, so if you see here, all this information about the review, it means when the meeting will be conducted, who are the other members, what date, what time, all this information will be shared by the secretary to all the team members. Okay, but when it comes to the document to be reviewed, the secretary will share it to only specific people who will be the reviewer, not to everyone. Okay, because the next process will be involved where the reviewer will do the individual preparation. So it means, let's assume, okay, next week, Monday, we want to conduct this review meeting. So 1 week before, the secretary will share the document, the copy of the document to the reviewers, only the reviewers, not other people. Okay, so the second role involved here is reviewers. 1 week earlier, the document will be shared with the reviewers, all the reviewers, so that the reviewers can do the individual preparation. It means they can study and review the object by themselves. It means they can study the document. Let's assume the SRS. So they can read the documentation. They can go through the functional requirement and functional requirement. Maybe there is involved with the use case diagram. All this by themselves individually. So let's assume I have 3 different reviewers involved this round. So these 3 individual reviewers will do their own preparation. So according to their knowledge, according to their experience, they will actually study the document and try to identify if there is any defects, if there is anything which is not clear, if they have any questions or any comments to give. So this will be in an earlier time before the meeting will be conducted, because not during the meeting time the reviewer will be busy studying the document. So they must do the individual preparation before the review meeting will be conducted. So at the third process here, it's only reviewers will be working on the document. Okay, so as what we planned, the Monday came. So now we are going to conduct the actual review meeting. Okay, so now everyone attending the meeting now. So there is a chairperson. Okay, so normally the review leader, out of the reviewers, there is one person called review leader, or the moderator will be the one. It means we call them either review leader or moderator, either one. So they will be the one being the chairperson to lead the the review meeting. Okay, so every team members, every reviewers, everybody need to behave professionally, because this review meeting sometimes can be a continuous argument for hours. So this chairperson must make sure that the meeting, first thing is the meeting must be conducted within the fixed time limit. If I said I'm going to do this review meeting for 2 hours, it means in that 2 hours we must do the review meeting for that document. Not keep on talking and then not concluding anything. Cannot be like that. Okay. So this review leader or the chairperson must ensure that the people inside the meeting able to be providing their opinions, especially the reviewers who